Hi, Professor Kane. It's Chad McCoy. I'm here to present my paper today on the evolution of UAS laws in the United States. Also, to point out, citations are listed on each page of the presentation, and then also a full works cited page at the end of the presentation. So we're going to cover today an introduction of the evolution of UAS laws in the United States. We'll get into some of the milestones for the FAA over the past 20 years, which include the FAA Modernization and Reform Act, UAS registration, Part 107 regulations, and then looking to the future of UAS laws, and finally, a conclusion. So going back to model aviation, back to the 1930s, the AMA was created at this point, and with actually the focus on safety as the foundation for UAS type operations. Then fast forward many years, we see early drones start to rise in the early 2000s, like 2007 was pointed out in the research, where the FAA really started to take notice. And that created some milestones that we're going to cover today. 2012, the FAA Modernization and Reform Act. Then in 2015, we see drone registration. 2016, we get into the Part 107 regulations. And then to where we are today in 2024. Starting with the FAA Modernization and Reform Act, this was passed back in 2012, and this was really the landmark legislation that kind of set the stage that the FAA would be the regulatory body for UAS operations. There was a 5-year plan to create testing sites that UAS could be tested and watched and to help create safety practices and regulations around the use of UAS in the airspace. 2013 showed the UAS Integration Office was created at that point, and that was from the Modernization and Reform Act. And then finally, the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 was the piece of legislation that really kind of solidified that the FAA would have full authority over UAS operations. Then in 2015 is when the FAA came out with UAS registration, which was really designed just to keep track of how many drones are really out there in our airspace. This was established in 2015, but was challenged in 2017 by John Taylor, who was a local lawyer and a drone enthusiast. He challenged it and actually won from a court of appeals. They saw in favor that the registration should not be required. But on the flip side, in 2018, the National Defense Authorization Act came out, and it really solidified that registration is required. So it was a good fight, but overall, he didn't win. But here's a picture of what the registration looks like. And it's really just a way to make sure your drone is registered. It sees there's a certificate of aircraft registration, a proof of ownership, and you receive this special registration number, ID number, that has to be marked on the UAS when it is being flown. Forgot to mention, there are weight limits for registration. Your drone has to be between 0.55 pounds and 55 pounds. So if it weighs less than the 0.55 pounds, that does include payload weight, then you would be exempt from registration. The cost is merely $5. It's a simple application fee as well to get that done. So not a hard process. Then we move into 2016, where the FAA came up with the Part 107 regulations, which actually were for UAS operations for commercial purposes. And this created the remote pilot certificate, which was a required knowledge test that had to be administered, that is administered to the FAA in order to receive that. And there's a picture of what that remote pilot certificate looks like. This initial regulations, the Part 107, did have limitations on specific operations, though, such as night flying and flying over people. But the FAA did accept waivers and did did approve exemptions for these type of businesses who needed that sort of thing to actually run their business. So then in 2021, an amendment came out that actually did cover some of those things, such as ways that you could do night flying with specific rules and flying over people as well. So what does the future of UAS laws hold for us? And as we have seen in today's world, the industry is expanding rapidly. We see inspections, we see mapping, we see surveying, we see agricultural applications, we see it in public safety and in law enforcement, disaster relief. We see more and more drones in our world today than ever. And that's just going to create more litigation, so additional lawsuits are going to be created, and which is really going to help when it comes to collection of case law. And that's really an important piece that was highlighted in when you looked at the future of UAS laws. State laws have been created, though. Drone-related laws in states, in majority of the states, have been created because the FAA can't cover everything, and there is some ambiguity in some of the regulations. So those have created as well. But case law is going to be very important, and principles versus specific drone laws. Based on the research, it said specific drone laws, having to sit down and create all those specific things is really probably not the way to go. It's going to take time. As case law extends, that creates principles, and those principles can be applied to the law. And then finally, an FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 just passed the U.S. House of Representatives. And this was significant because it reauthorizes the FAA's authority until 2028 and mandates them to come up with rules for the beyond visual line of sight. And those operations are so important to commercial delivery, which is continuing to expand, as well as public safety and law enforcement. So the FAA will continue to provide information into the future. They are going to be the primary regulatory body, but they can assist legislation, legislatures, they can assist courts, drone operators, and help them understand why regulations are required for the integration of UAS into the national airspace. And finally, in conclusion, we've gone back to 1930s for model aviation with the AMA creation and move forward all the way to today. But at the same time, the initial foundation of creating safety and lawful use of UAS in the national airspace is really the foundation. We've gone through the milestones of the Modernization and Reform Act of 2012, then the UAS registration piece in 2015, Part 107 regulations in 2016, and on from there. And even with the most recent modernization, not modernization, or Reauthorization Act of 2024, we are seeing the FAA is highly involved and will continue to evolve in this regulatory environment. It will be important for people to make sure that we can adapt to those regulations and work together to be able to fully integrate UAS into the national airspace. And I pointed out some pictures here. I really love the delivery drone of Wing. That's really cool. That one's up there. The Jetson in the middle, and the Whisk air taxi at the bottom there. So hopefully we'll see all those things happen more and more into our future as well. And finally, sources cited page. And that's it. Thanks so much.